I was never named officially an elder, but I was an acting elder. I was a ministerial servant in the congregation. I could say that what really started to compound everything was when I ended up coming to Honduras.
Okay.
That's where things, really changed in my life. My therapist was an atheist. He was a, substance abuse counselor. He pulled the ace out of his sleeve. He's like, I'm trying to understand, you're always telling me about, your God, I'm confused. He said, you're telling me about this organization. You've got this international brotherhood that's so great. And, you've got the privilege of having the only truth. You've got the most accurate Bible that's restored God's name, right? Jehovah. He said, I want some coherence here. If that's the case, what the hell are you doing here? I walked in there in the middle of this meeting and put the letter down on the table and I walked out. 2014, never been back since. That was the end.
So when you were in the Jehovah's Witnesses for a long time, what was it that finally made you spark? Because I feel like everybody has a certain spark and that can change depending on the person. What was the spark for you that made you kind of take a second glance and be like, is this really what I want to believe?
Yeah, Adam, I think there was a series of events that took place over many years. I don't think it was, I know it wasn't just one particular event. It was a combination of, first of all, being born into a particular group like this, like you mentioned that you were as well with the Mormon faith, and it it takes a long time because when you're born into that, and of course the initial years of your life, I mean, up through pretty much being a teenager, you're pretty much just going along with the system that was imposed on you because your family did it and you just went along with what they were doing. And when I was growing up, really, going to the worship, going to meetings and the Kingdom Hall wasn't an option. It was like, you're going, like, get ready, and so we had to go out and preach and do all these things and door to door. And as I grew up and you get to a certain age where you start to observe people and you start to observe attitudes, and I was very connected with the the emotional aspect, the treatment, the attitudes of people versus what we were being taught and what the Bible said as well. Even though, I mean, albeit the Jehovah's Witness version of the Bible, and in recent years they've changed it even more, really twisted things. But um, I could tell pretty early on, like, a lot of people, most of the people that I knew, really didn't believe it. They really didn't show any, like, that this faith system, this belief system had any real power in their lives. It was just kind of a routine that people went through, and they were, I don't know, for whatever reason, people just were in it. And but it didn't change their attitudes, it didn't change their personality. People were still just, kind of miserable, mean, or whatever their personality was. And yet we're getting bombarded constantly with this message of this loving brotherhood, and we've got all this love, and Jesus and Jehovah's love and all this stuff. And yet you're going, yeah, but nobody's really practicing it. Nobody's really, especially when you run into people, the dealings you have with elders in the congregation and the dealings you have with circuit overseers and branch members and Bethel members. They're not loving at all. They're just a lot of them nasty people. And you take people that really don't have any education per se, and you put them in these positions of authority that are quite powerful, because they can have a profound effect on the life of a person. And so these men in the congregation would really have like a power trip, and they could really, really make your life miserable. And so I would see those things, but of course, when you're raised in it, you are from a very fundamental stage in your life, you are indoctrinated and brainwashed that you don't voice those concerns or, talk about it in public or anything like that. You just, the best thing to do is just to keep it to yourself, trust in Jehovah, talk to him about it. And of course, if you do say anything, you would talk to somebody, of confidence, in which case they would probably tell you, oh, maybe you should talk to an elder about it. They might even tell them ahead of time, like, oh, brother so-and-so is going to talk to you about something. And that I found out too was a real kind of a catch-22 type situation. Like, like sometimes if you would really like sincerely, honestly want to not like, okay, I don't want to upset the congregation. I don't want to show doubt. I don't want to show that I'm doubting, but I want to know, I want to have an answer for this question or why is this happening? And then you feel like supposedly you're going through the right channels and you go and talk to one of these, leaders in the congregation, and then it totally ends up backfiring on you. Because then you talk to them and then they start interrogating you and, oh, maybe I need to bring someone else in here. And the next thing you know, there's two of them. And then it's interrogation, and, oh, how long have you felt this way? And, have you talked to anybody else and all this stuff? Then you're kind of like, oh, dang, what did I get into? Or I should have kept my mouth shut. Right. Cause then all of a sudden it's like, now they're going to be, now that they know about it, now they're going to be watching you and they're going to be surveilling you and keeping up on what you're doing and, oh, how have you been doing and what we talked about, and they'll meet with you and it's just like, oh man, no, you just, oh, I'm fine. No, that's cleared up. I've been praying about it. And even like, nah. So yeah, that went on and there are lots of, I guess, little micro situations of different experiences and different things and just observing the way that they would, deal with people in the congregation. And it always bothered me. It always bothered me from very early on. And I guess I could say that what really started to compound everything was when I ended up coming to Honduras. Okay. That's where things, really changed in my life. So, like you mentioned before, everyone's curious about how the heck did I end up here, right?
Yeah.
And so basically what ended up happening was, and I don't think at the end of the day, I don't think any of this was coincidence, really. I think that it's God that has a plan for us. And when he has chosen you for something, of course, depending on each person, we all have different journeys. And in my case, all of these experiences that I had were necessary to show me certain things. And this gave me a frame of reference later on to understand what was really the truth, right? And what I had lived in my whole life before that. And so basically, at that point, we're talking about around 2001, 2002, right around there. So I'm like 19 years old, 20 years old, about 20 years old at that point. And, I was very, very active as a witness. I was a type of, going from being a Jehovah's Witness to, just believing in Jesus. And it was kind of a like Paul type conversion because I was very, very passionate about being a witness. I was very into it. And I was very good at being a speaker and preaching to people. And, and I advanced quite far in I was serving in the congregation as a servant, and I pioneered, which is the like full-time preaching work, the pioneer work. And I went to a wedding, a witness wedding, got invited to a wedding, and I ran into, just out of the blue, another witness friend of mine that we went to school together. And actually we went to college together. So we were kind of fringe on that issue because, the going to college was never, but we kind of, I have to say that in my case, we kind of played the system because there was a program in my high school where we started like in 10th grade, and you go part of the day at high school and then the other part of the day at the college, and the credits were for both. They counted for both college and for high school. So I got like 2 years early, like a start on going to college. So by the time I graduated, I only had 1 year left in engineering, and I finished. So it didn't really, because nobody really knew. That was the whole issue. It was like I was going to high school, so nobody questioned that.
Well, it's
But
personal
anyway,
preference now anyway. So
yeah, I know. Yeah, that's the thing. That just
that's old
burned
light.
that burned my hide big time, because I mean, when I was growing up, that was like, whoa, I was big time no,
Yeah.
or going like higher education, and all of that. So of course they changed completely on that now.
Yeah.
But I ran into this guy and it was like, "Oh man, how are you doing? I haven't seen you in a couple of years, And I was like, "What are you up to?" And he's like, "Well, in another like 2 weeks, I'm going to Honduras." He's like, "I got invited by this missionary couple, which were from Minnesota too." And he said, "We're going to be doing like a hall build. We're going to build the roof on this kingdom hall. So we're going to do like welding and stuff like that." He's like, "You should come with. You should come with." And I'm just like, I didn't even at that time, I couldn't point out Honduras on a map. I had no idea, where it was, or, I was pretty ignorant Minnesota kid, northern Minnesota. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. So, and I'm just like, in 2 weeks, I was like, I don't know. I said, well, give me your number, and we reconnected, and I said, I'll let you know. So I started doing like research, and back then, it cost like over $1,000 to get a ticket down here. It was really expensive. And so, ironically, of all people, it was my parents that ended up giving me the money. And they're like, go, just have fun, and it's going to be an experience. And I'm just like, oh my God. So I called him up and I'm like, hey, I got the money. And he's like, all right. He's like, just buy the ticket. And he's like, I'll give you my info. And then so we can like coincide with the flights and everything. And I was like,
That's
cool. So we
wild.
ended up going. And I was working at that time. I was working at a factory in Hibbing, Minnesota, and I was operating like these automated welding machines and stuff at this factory that they did contracts for the mines. And no, went down there. As far as I was concerned, it was a week trip. That was it, and then go back and just life goes on, right? And go down there, and we meet this missionary couple and everything. I mean, it was a totally different experience. It was like culture shock. I mean, total culture shock. And that week while I was down there, I met my first wife, my now ex-wife, who was obviously a witness too, and her family and everything else. And the rest is history. So I met her, and we kind of hit it off. And then, I was like, back then I was really crazy. I was very, very impulsive, and I was just like, you want to get married? I was like, let's just screw it. Let's do it. I was like, but I have to go back to Minnesota. I can't just stay here right now. I've got to go back and, get my stuff together. And so I went back. This was like in October of 2002, somewhere around there. And I went back for about 3 months, about the beginning, like January, February 2003. I came back to Honduras. And in April of 2003, I got married to this sister there, and I've been here ever since. A year later, our first daughter was born, and then it just kind of went from there. So when I came down here, the whole idea was what they call within the Jehovah's Witness world is a need grader, right? A need grader is somebody who basically volunteers to go do missionary work in another place where they have need. That can be in another country. It can be so. I came down here. I joined the congregation where this missionary brother from Minnesota also was. And I was never, and I've told people on the channel before, number one, I was never a circuit overseer. Okay, I'll tell you about the story behind that, how that came to be my channel name. But I was never named officially an elder, but I was an acting elder. I was a ministerial servant in the congregation, but at that time, the congregation, the missionary brother was the only elder, and there was one ministerial servant, which was my brother-in-law, my ex-brother-in-law. So they only had two people running the whole congregation. And so when they would have their like quarterly or whenever by need, they had programmed elders meetings, but also they came up as need be, right? I had to be there and sit in on them because there was only three of us. So I had to be up on everything. So basically the missionary brother just explained to me like, hey, like you're going to be practically like an elder. People are going to see you that way. So, I'm going to get you a copy of the Shepherd, the Flock of God book, which is a manual. That to me was crazy because that was the first time, um, I'd always heard like rumors about the existence of it. You got to remember that, the time I grew up, 80s, 90s, and then this was 2003, we still didn't have like internet was not real like widespread. I mean, people still like had dial up in their home and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And so you didn't have access to a lot of information still. A lot of that stuff was unknown. And we didn't have, touch phones or smartphones or anything like that. We were still using these little digital, cell phones and stuff. So um to actually see it for the first time, and then I was like, oh damn, this is real. I heard about it, but and then I started reading it, and that was the first like real shock in my life where everything kind of started to come together and make sense. A lot of the things that I observed and the attitudes and the ways that they handled certain things, which I always thought was, without knowing, being ignorant, I just kind of thought that the elders kind of did things on their own and figured things out. And then they would have to report to the circuit overseer and he would report to the branch and everything. But no, everything was spelled out in black and white in this manual. How the congregations are set up, how the elders are set up, how they choose people and name them in their positions. And then what surprised me was almost the entire manual is dedicated to disciplinary things. It's all about how to handle disfellowshipping offenses and judicial committees. And so I was like, wow, it's like they really put emphasis on, like, I thought it was more spiritual, like related things like that. But no, it was all mostly like how to discipline people and kick them out of the congregation. And I was really surprised to see how they considered certain things, getting a blood transfusion or celebrating a holiday or things like that, and how those things were, considered to be, that would be considered apostasy and things like that, or like somebody having
Dang.
financial problems. Yeah. And just, things like sight and things like that. And I'm just like, whoa, this is crazy. No wonder they just treat people so bad and like basically marginalize people, because it's like right here. It's right here in writing where it's basically like, okay, these people, yeah, they got issues. Oh, if a person's like, if a person's having financial difficulties, it's like instead of helping them out and supporting them, it's accusatory right away. Like, oh, go talk to their brother and oh, is this their fault? Did they contribute to this somehow? Did they, do this? Did they do that? Or they, so you're just going, oh man, okay, yeah. Now this is starting to make sense.
You're seeing how it's really working.
Yeah. Yeah.
God,
Because
God,
you got to understand,
yeah.
Adam, this is like, I'm like in my early 20s. This is my first actual contact with like the next level up
Tier,
from,
yeah.
yeah, just even from a ministerial servant, because ministerial servants don't go to elder meetings, they don't have the manual, they still don't have access to any of that. They're still pretty much, you just follow orders. Once you get on that level, and then you actually have, when the circuit overseer comes, who's basically like a regional manager. I mean, the whole organization is set up like a corporation, right? He's the regional manager. He comes, takes the pulse of the congregation, talks to the elders. You have meetings with him in private, and wants to know how things are going. He pulls these records of all the publishers to see how many hours they're putting in, what's the average of the congregation, how many studies are you conducting, and that's kind of where really the doubt started to happen. And also, another issue is that when you serve in another part of the world, you start to figure out pretty early on that the organization is not run the same way everywhere. And in each country, the people just kind of, they do whatever they want. And even these brothers who are supposedly, they've been trained officially by this organization, and they're just kind of doing whatever. It's like, wow, we're here. This is Honduras, so you know we do whatever we want here. So it was quite a different experience.
Gotcha. And so you were in those elder meetings, and um, were you in any judiciary hearings or anything like that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah. So you were in the elder meetings. Were you ever in a judiciary meeting, as far as like having to disfellowship somebody or someone's like repentance or something like that?
Yeah. Okay. In that aspect, personally, no. I never had to make any of those decisions. Thankfully, I think that would have really been a difficult thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I when they had uh judicial meetings, usually what would happen is the senior elder, who was uh the missionary brother, he would have other elders come from. There was like two other congregations in the town that we lived in, because they had more experience, and they would just come in and handle those things. So yeah, I didn't have to really deal with any of that.
Gotcha. And so you were basically acting elder in that case. So what did that mean? Like you would give talks every now and then, you would go
Yep.
preaching, or what all
Oh yeah.
did that entail?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, the giving talks, that was weekly. That was every single week. I had to give talks at the assemblies, the large assemblies, the conventions. We did all that. We did shepherding calls, where you go and visit people in the congregation at their homes to check up on them, and whatever issues they're having and things like that. And so yeah, I did pretty much everything else. I think I just never got far enough, really, uh to, I think, to be sitting in actually on the judicial committees. I don't know if it's maybe because of liability reasons or whatever, but you actually had to be an official elder, so I wasn't included on those.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so that we I served for a few years here until right around let's see, 2006 or so, right around in that area. And then because of there was some issues at that time with my ex-wife. She was having a number of health problems. There were some issues going on, and both mental health things and physical things, and we just didn't know what was going on. It was putting a lot of strain on our relationship, and of course, obviously, everything else too. The difference in cultures and all this stuff was, it was a
That's a
really
lot.
tough learning experience, learning Spanish and on the fly and everything. So eventually what ended up happening was in 2006, I ended up going back to Minnesota, and it took me about a year or so to get to go through this immigration process with my ex-wife and my first daughter that was born there. And we went back to Minnesota for about 3 years. And so while we were there, back in Minnesota, uh, my second daughter was born. And then in 2008, so about a year later, in 2008, my second daughter was born in Minnesota. And then just a couple months after she was born, my ex-wife was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh no.
And so that situation would kind of be the beginning of the end of everything. It still took several years, but that whole situation, obviously, from one day to the next, our entire uh, life was just turned upside down. And it was really difficult because we were living in a different city. My parents by that time were not witnesses anymore. They were out of the organization. They were going through a divorce, and it was just a mess. It was a complete disaster. And I have two older brothers. They're still witnesses. They're still active witnesses. I haven't talked to them since uh, 2010, 2011, right around there. So I know absolutely nothing about them, their lives, anything, because obviously I'm not a witness anymore, so they won't talk to me. And so it was a very tough situation. It was just, it was economic disaster. It was emotional, psychological. And I had my two daughters that were very young. I had this newborn baby. I was dealing with the stuff my parents were going through with their divorce. My dad was just went off the deep end, and he had fallen back into drinking, and at that point, um, I wasn't working. You know, we were basically like getting like state help because I had to take care of my daughters. I didn't have any support from anybody. My two brothers were just kind of like, oh well, let us know, you know, if you need anything, one of those deals, you know. And so to deal with all of this stuff, I also started drinking as well. And I mean, Minnesota, I've been drinking since I was 15. It wasn't like it was anything new. You
Right.
know, witnesses, a lot of people don't realize this, but, you know, witnesses drink a lot. It's a very big part of the culture, especially
I've
in
heard.
Minnesota. There's really
Yeah,
not
I've
much else
heard.
to do. I mean, especially in winter, everybody drinks. So I really fell into that, and also got into some other substances, you know, some opium based pills like hydrocodone, and then these anti anxiety like Ativan and or Xanax, whatever, stuff like that, you know. And I was a mess. It was a mess, Adam. It was a mess. It was a complete mess. My life was a disaster. Um, you know, and I went from, you know, being in Honduras and serving there and being very active to all of a sudden back in Minnesota just doing absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
You know, we were just existing. We were just, that's it. Just living, waiting for the, you know, the food
I
stamps
get
and
it.
the, you know, the EBT card every month to recharge, and dealing with my wife's health. You know, she had to go through chemo and all of that. It was just, it was hell. It was hell. And then,
I have a question.
yeah,
Um, During that time, I mean, you were obviously expected to continue going to Kingdom Hall, right?
yeah,
And on top of that, you had all the pressure of like, well, Armageddon can be any day. You know, am
right.
I worthy? Am I able to make it to this paradise?
Yep,
So you have all that mental anxiety on top of what you're currently going through. So not only do you have to still stick with the status quo that the cult is wanting you to stick with, but you're dealing with real life situations.
right.
And I have a sneaking suspicion that the Jehovah's Witness organization didn't do anything to help you lighten your load in that regard to your actual life.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. That's what, where when you're a Jehovah's Witness and you start running into real issues, like real life issues that require just practicality and compassion, that's where you really start seeing this incongruency, where things are just not adding up. Like this loving organization, where is it? Where, I mean, they were, yeah, they were real concerned about, like, they assign this elder to us, and, oh, make sure that we get to the meeting, you know, make sure that we get out in service with them and stuff like that. But that really isn't what we needed, you know. And the help that we did need, just to have, you know, maybe somebody there to talk to and to vent on a little bit. And but these were, you know, even then, considerably, there were like more and more, there were very young elders that were starting to come up through the ranks, and they were accepting this in the organization. So you know, they're like guys that didn't have a lot of life experience, and they were never really like crazy about, you know, nobody wants to take on your problems or really actually get involved with
Care.
anybody or do anything. It's just very like superficial, you know. Oh yeah, we'll help you get to meetings and stuff like that, but don't bother us with the rest of the stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Just kind of deal with it, and and nobody wants to really get involved with it. And we were in really bad shape, and I was basically just losing my mind. I was going crazy, and I was addicted to all this stuff. I was drinking, I was taking pills. I was just my mind was messed up. Everything was messed up.
Which, in my opinion, that's when you need the congregation the most. That's when you
Right.
really need somebody to come in and, not be like, hey, when are you going preaching? Right? My cult was the same
Yeah.
way. It's like, well, we'll see you at church. It's like, I'll be lucky if I make it to the end of the
Yeah.
week,
Yeah,
physically.
I'm lucky if I wake up, right?
Exactly.
Much less doing anything at church or anything like that, and it was just like a lot of that, which in the time I really didn't understand what was happening to me, but a lot of that just load that was on top of me, this weight, was because of the fact that I felt like I was just my world was coming apart and I was completely failing as a witness. I was
Yeah.
failing Jehovah. I was, I'm not, I can barely even, I don't make it to all the meetings. I'm barely preaching. I used to serve. I was all, I was coming down on myself. Man, I used to be like basically an elder. I was serving. I was in another country. We were respected. And here I am now. Basically, I'm an alcoholic. I'm a junkie and I'm hiding it from everybody.
Hmm.
And my life is just a disaster. I don't have anything. I don't have a dime to my name. And you're just like guilt, shame. I'm failing Jehovah. This is just a mess. And so the whole thing came to a head when we went to a meeting, and I went there and I talked to. We were at the end of the meeting. We came out into the parking lot, and I approached the elder who was kind of assigned to us to look after us and stuff, and so I needed some gas money, and I was very always ashamed and hated to ask people for help like that, and but I didn't have a choice really, and I asked him if he could spare any $20 or whatever for gas, and he just kind of stood there and just shook his head, and he said, "When is this gonna stop?" And I was just like just taken aback. I was like, "Whoa!" I was like, "What?" You know, and I just realized like in that moment, like, okay, this guy just basically he just minimized my whole suffering, everything we're going through, to just like a bother. Like, oh, why are you asking me again? Just, stop. And I said, yeah, I said, you know what, brother? I said, you're right. I said, this does have to stop, and it's going to stop right now. And I got in my vehicle with my family and we left. And at least in the United States, for the remainder of the time that we were there, that was the last time I went to a Kingdom Hall. I never went back. Never went back there. And so eventually we just decided to, my wife never really got accustomed to living there, and we really didn't have a support system. So we made a tough decision, and we came back to, this was now like 2011, beginning of 2011. We came back to Honduras once again, and just from then on, it was just we never really incorporated again 100% into the congregation. I never served again. I was very hit and miss with the meetings. Barely preached. I just was, something was not there anymore, and I think a lot of it had to do with which I skipped over this part, but right before we went back, I had checked myself into a rehab program. It was an outpatient rehab program. So I checked myself into this program, and that was also God sent. That was completely God sending me there. And it was eye opening because I had a therapist who, interestingly, at that time, this was a whole another story as well, where he's now a Christian, but at that time, he was an atheist. My therapist was an atheist. He was a substance abuse counselor,
Hmm.
and he was very vocal about it. But he had a very interesting way of like getting in between your armor, like asking you questions, and even Adam, even in that situation, as messed up as I was, and being in that program, I was still like, I would go into JW mode and want to like preach, to people and like tell him how great this organization was and our Paradise Hope and all this stuff. And so
Yep.
we would have these like one-on-one, like once a week. We'd have a one-on-one session with them. And I go in there and I start going on my little spiel, about all this stuff, and he just stops me and he's like, he said, I'm trying to, he pulled the ace out of his sleeve. He's like, I'm trying to understand. You're always telling me about, your God. You've got. I'm confused. He said, you're telling me about this organization. You've got this international brotherhood that's so great, and you've got the privilege of having the only truth. You've got the most accurate Bible that's restored God's name, right? Jehovah. And you've got you're a servant of the only true God, and you're the only true religion, and you have the hope of this wonderful, you're going to live in paradise. And he's like, oh, I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay. He's like, so just help me out here. I'm just trying to be coherent. He said, I want some coherence here. If that's the case, what the hell are you doing here? He's like,
Gotcha.
why are you like, you're basically, you're trying to kill yourself. He's like, you've been going through, 30 plus, like codeine type, like Oxycontin, hydrocodone pills every single day, Xanax, you're drinking, and he said, you're basically like the most miserable person I've ever seen in my life. And he's like, why is your, like, all the stuff you got going for you, it's not working for you, is it? Otherwise you wouldn't be here, would you? And literally, Adam, I was just like factory reset. I was like fatal error, like Windows fatal error. I mean, I froze up and I just broke down crying. He literally just cut through all the BS, cut through all that indoctrination, all that automatic, that stuff that you, the little, the quoting script. Yeah, right. All the thought stopping mechanisms and the these argument breakers and all this stuff. Yep. He just cut right through it and was like, if all of that were true, then you would be the happiest guy in the world. You wouldn't be here. But here you are, like basically just, you're slowly yourself. It doesn't make any sense. And so basically at that moment, it was just like lucidity, clarity, where I'm like seeing like this whole time, it was these false, this structure that they had created for me, and all these things that I was indoctrinated with since I was a child had absolutely no real power. It had no power. My faith was garbage, Adam. It was nothing. I had no faith because when I really needed it and I should have leaned on it, I turned to substances. And at the same time, the people that I consistently saw that were reaching out, that were helping me, that were being compassionate, that were being understanding, that were accepting me instead of shunning me, instead of pushing me away, were the very people that I was always taught were false religion. They were part of false religion. They were worldly, right?
Satan's system.
Right. They were Satan's system. They were part of Satan's false religion, Christendom. But this was this internal struggle that I had going on inside of me. Nothing was making sense because these people were supposed to be the ones that were not doing what they were supposed to, and yet they were showing the Christ personality consistently. So I started thinking, wait a minute, you know what? There are people that are not witnesses, and you know what? Probably the majority of them are not going to be witnesses that are saved. They're going to be saved because in the end, I knew, at the very least, I knew what the Bible said. I knew that God saw people's hearts. He didn't judge on outward, appearances or what church you go to. He looks at your heart condition. He looks at your actions, how you treat your neighbor and things like that. So I started to see, like, it just kind of started to make sense. Like, wait a minute. The ones that are not doing this is us.
Yeah.
we're the ones that we're not acting like Christians.
We're the
And I'm just like,
Pharisees.
oh my God, my whole, so this man literally, until this day, we're still in contact because years later he ended up accepting Christ and becoming a brother, becoming a servant of God. And it was just amazing because he was like, we would talk years later and he was like, you know what? He was like, you helped me too, because I saw your struggle and I saw how you, were coming out of that and God was really calling you. And now I can see that,
Yeah.
you know, and it was just amazing years later to be able to talk to each other like brothers in Christ now,
Yeah.
when he used to be atheist. But I told him years later, I just thanked him and I said, you saved my life, so that once that planted the seed, that from there's no stopping it.
Yeah.
Once I came back to Honduras, and years later, moving ahead to 2014, my wife at that time and I got divorced. We went through that process. It took several years, but we ended up getting divorced, separated, and that is really where the hell started. When I renounced the organization, because I went to a meeting. We lived like a block from the Kingdom Hall. So I saw one evening when the lights were on there, and usually at that time, if you saw the lights on, if it was a non-meeting night, there was probably an elders meeting going on. So I wrote a letter, just giving my explanations, and I'm done
How
with
did
this. I
that
can't do
feel?
this.
How did that feel writing that letter?
Actually, at that time, I was a little scared. I was kind of anxious about it, but at the same time, it just I couldn't
You knew
go
it
on
was
with it either.
inevitable.
I just couldn't do it anymore. It wasn't working. It wasn't, and of course the divorce was a mess. The witnesses are very like divorces are like no, and they were trying everything to get me to reconcile with her and go back. We had already separated like 3 times. We're going through this game of separating, then coming back, and then separating, and happened like 3 times. And I was finally like, no,
We're done.
this isn't working.
Yeah.
If I continue on in this situation, we just there's no love here anymore, and I'm dying. If I stay with this person, I'm gonna die inside, and I'm not willing to do that. And so I walked in there in the middle of this meeting and put the letter down on the table, and I walked out. 2014, never been back since. That was the end. That was the end of it. And of that stage, but that began another stage, of course, where what happens to a lot of us, where as a recent ex-witness, you enter into a very dangerous area in your life where you walk away from the organization, or whether you're kicked out or you walk away or whatever the situation is, and all of a sudden from one day to the next, you're just like spiraling in the air. You've got nothing. Everything you knew, your entire surrounding, your social structure, your family, your friends, everybody you knew, what you believed, it's all gone. And you've got this also tremendous just lost feeling and confusion. And what do I do now? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? Adam, I didn't even know how to make friends. I didn't even know how to, because we never had any contact, like friendships outside of the organization.
Yeah.
Because you were always avoiding people at work. You were avoiding, having friends at school. And so socially, I was a disaster. Like just my social skills.
And I would argue that your whole premise of having friendships in the first place outside the organization is to get them to come in to the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, and now it was also this tremendous like shame and embarrassment, because in the town where I lived here in Honduras at the time, I don't live in the same town now. I've long since moved, but everybody knew me. I lived there for years. Everybody knew me. Everybody knew me from like preaching and from my jobs, because at that time I was working like in schools, private schools, teaching English. And so everybody knew I was a witness. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, now I'm out. And people are just like, what? They couldn't believe it. They're just like, no, this can't be, Collin, no way. And so all of a sudden I'm like facing like all these people, and people are here are very curious. They'll ask you all these questions, and all of a sudden it was like, well, I thought you were a witness. Well, I thought you had all the answers. I thought you were very like strong in your faith, and what happened and all this
You
stuff.
were
And
the
then
truth, the true organization.
yeah, what happened? I thought you were and I argued with a lot of those people because, I had friends that were evangelical, friends that were Catholic, and I, argued with everybody and anybody. And now all of a sudden, you're just like, oh, I want to hide under a rock, And initially, when people found out that I wasn't a witness anymore, then I was just getting bombarded left and right. People were inviting me to the Catholic Church. People were inviting me to the evangelical churches. Like, come to our church, come to our church. You're gonna, you'll love it. You'll, come accept Jesus. Come to, and of course, as a witness, you're totally, oh man, Adam, you are totally unprepared because as witnesses, you're not allowed to go to other churches.
Yep.
I had never in my life ever set foot in another church. I had no idea what it was like or what to expect. And I would, I started out going to like here, basically, I would say about 99% of all of the Protestant churches, evangelical churches are all Pentecostal. And,
that's a culture shock right there.
Yeah, as an ex-witness, wherever you live, going cold turkey into a Pentecostal church, oh man, I didn't know what the heck was going on. People speaking in tongues and jumping around and rolling on the floor and all kinds of stuff going on and just mayhem. Dang. And the music and the just they're screaming and the preaching and stuff. And I never lasted more than like 2-3 minutes. I'd be heading for the door. I was out of there. I was just like, no. So finally, I just kind of got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm a lost cause. This isn't going to work. Well, I ended up, of all the places, which was very ironic, and I know that God has a sense of humor, but I also understand now why he did it. Of all the places, the church that I ended up actually attending for like 5 years was the Catholic Church. And that was, as a witness, the absolute last place you would have ever found me in.
Aren't they Babylon?
Yeah, that's the of Babylon the Great, which is all of the empire of false religion, right? And the most reprehensible part at the head is the Catholic Church. They're like the worst of the worst, because they claim to speak for Jesus and all of that. And so, but I was like, you know what? At that point, I was so disconnected from everything. I was just like, what the heck? I went everywhere else. Why not here? I'll give it a try. And when I went to a cathedral and I went to a mass for the first time. Of course, I didn't understand anything, what they were doing or saying, or not that I didn't understand the language. I'm just saying I didn't understand like what it was about. But I felt like strangely at peace. It was very confusing. I felt at peace there, and nobody ever judged me. Nobody, said anything cross to me, or, I just went there, and it was kind of like just each person, nobody really cared. It's between you and God, And in all reality, and I think God knew this when I went there, the Catholic Church and the masses are very structured. Yeah. There's a very, very rigid structure, and it was very similar to the witnesses, actually. It was very familiar, like having this, you got this program every week. All the masses are the same all over the world. They've got this liturgy that they do every day. They follow this program, and you've got this hierarchy, and it's, and I was like, okay, yeah, this feels like I'm at home again. Like, it's quiet and it's, yeah, okay. So I was there just long enough during those 5 years to kind of unprogram a lot of what I had learned and learn some of the basic stuff, like who Jesus really is, what the cross is, all that kind of basic stuff. And the guy who kind of was my mentor was a Catholic priest who was assigned to Honduras, but he was actually from Mexico, and his name was Padre Joel, Father Joel. And he was very instrumental in helping me to kind of purge and deprogram all of this stuff. And he was patient. He was very knowledgeable. I found out that Catholic priests are very, very studied and knowledgeable.
Very smart.
Yeah, very smart. And he was very patient. He listened to my questions, my doubts. Never judged me. Was never came down on me or anything. And he just said, "Hey," he said, "listen, Collin." He said, "Here's the deal." He said, "I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend to say like I know what your process is going to be or what God has planned for you, but he said I do know that he's drawing you to him. That's why you're here. Wherever you end up, I don't know, but he said I do know this though. If you stick with this, and if God truly does have a plan for you, then you are going to go through a very, very tough few years. You're going to go through a desert, and it's going to seem like mayhem for a long time, like chaos, because um, God has this plan for you. He's taken you out of this cult, and he's trying to redirect you, get you on the right path, and deprogram all of this indoctrination. But you know what? He said the devil also knows it. Yeah. He also sees like that potential that God's trying to get you back on the right path. And in the witnesses, you were fine. He wasn't worried about you because he had you fooled completely, right? Now, though, now it's for the devil. Now it's a challenge and it's a threat. So he's coming at you. He said, "Be ready for it." He's coming at you, and boy, was he right. Because once again, I found myself just, I left the Catholic Church. I ended up not continuing there because I got to the point where I got so deep into it, I was actually going to convert to Catholicism. I was going to get baptized. I went to the catechism classes for adults. And when I started getting into that, and you start learning all these like precepts and rules of the church and their doctrines, then I was like, I can't continue with this. Purgatory, limbo, all this stuff, nah.
Mary.
Sorry, but yeah, I was like, no. It's not, I know it's wrong. I just know it's wrong. And so I ended up leaving, and that started another basically 8-10 year, just another disaster, because I left there, and once again, I just felt totally lost. I was like, I thought I had it figured out. I thought I finally found a niche where I was accepted. I thought that I was on the right track. And here I am once again. I'm finding out, you know what? The Catholic Church is a bunch of lies, just like the witnesses and everybody else. And there's all this division and there's all these problems and stuff. And so I'm like, oh, man. And so I left there basically, and I went so far at him as to, I prayed to God. And I said, here's the issue. I said, I don't even know why you're trying. Why are you even bothering? Why are you wasting your time on me? I'm too gone. My indoctrination from the witnesses, it was since the time I was born. It's too ingrained in me. I can't change. I'm never going to be able to assimilate into another religion. It's not going to happen. I'm a lost cause. So I said, screw it. I said, from this point on, I'm going to throw myself into the world, and I'm going to make you hate me. That's what I told him. Verbatim. I said, I'm going to make you hate me. You're going to cast me off because I'm going to do every vile, bad thing that I never did, not even when I was young. And I was in my late 30s by this time. I'm 45 now, but I was in my late 30s at this time. And at that time now, this was, like I said, this was around 2014, 15. I had started working properly in my profession as a structural engineer, and I was in these, I got into, through a friend, got my foot in the door and was able to start working in construction projects. And that opened up a door to a whole new lifestyle, because now I was making a bunch of money. I was traveling all over. Like every year I was in a different place. All over the country. I went all over the country. I went up to the Bay Islands. I was there for a year and just went apeshit crazy. Excuse the expression. But just during that time period, partying, drinking, clubs, bars, women, you name it. Just everything. Because I felt like it was just psychologically, I was so messed up. I was just like, I'm hopeless.
It was pointless, yeah.
Yeah, it's pointless. Why? I really tried. I tried to go to other churches. I tried, I at least, thank God, at the very beginning, I did go to a church. I accepted Christ, did that whole thing, got baptized at a church, an evangelical church. But I was just like, I was like, they're right. I was like, at the end of the day, look, they were right. The witnesses were right. I'm worthless. I walked away from God. I turned my back on him. This is all happening. I deserve it. I'm worthless. I'm just going to die anyway. The end is going to come. And so I might as well just live it up, because I'm hopeless anyway. There's no way I'm going to be saved. And I became an atheist. I stopped believing in God. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to know anything about it. I was very critical of it, of churches, of the Bible, everything. But that belief was always in my heart. It was always there in the back of my mind. Like I knew like this wasn't the right path. But it just, what was I going to do about it?
Yeah.
And that all changed once, I got to the point where basically, like I said, God knows what he's doing and he has a sense of humor. And I finally got to the point when I met my current wife now, who is an absolute angel. She's my savior. God, the Lord put her in my life for a reason. It was destined. It was because she's very centered and strong in her faith. And she had an absolute horrific childhood. I mean, if there's anybody that had a reason to go off the deep end or get into substance abuse or, anything like that, it was her with what she went through growing up. And she didn't do any of that. And her rock and her center was always the Lord, was always Christ. And so we got together, and I was still kind of in the first few years that we got together, I was still kind of in that mode, drinking, and she would always, even when I was drinking, I was stone drunk, and she would come and she would kneel by my side and put her hand on me and pray for me. And I would push her hand away and get away from me. And, I'll be like, leave me alone. I'm like, don't waste your time praying on me. I'm lost. I'm condemned. And she's like, no, don't say that. You're not condemned. You're going to come out of this. You're going to come out of this. And she kept doing it, kept on. And finally, one day, it was just like a switch went off. And I was like, woke up one day and just said, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm sick of myself. What am I doing? What have I become? I don't even recognize myself anymore. And what am I doing to my wife? This poor woman after what she's been through. And here I am giving her hell too. And here she is staying steadfast, praying for me, doing all this stuff. And I'm just pulling in the opposite direction. I need to be supporting her. And I told her, I said, you know what? I said, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to get this out of my life. And it wasn't immediate. It wasn't one day to the next, but I went through a process. But eventually, I got all that stuff out of my life, stopped drinking, started, not all the time. I'm not going to lie and say all the time, but every once in a while I'd go with her to church and, started praying again, started reading the Bible. We read the Bible every night together and pray together. And I'll go to some church services every once in a while, but just literally once I made that decision, Adam, it was kind of like the scriptures that I had read about God saying, test me out, try me out, see that I'm good, that this is the right way, and then I always, my favorite book of the Bible actually was always James, the book of James, and reading about being constant. If you're going to ask for something, if you're going to believe in the Lord and ask something in his name, you have to believe it. You have to be sure about what you're doing, about what you're asking for, and not be, back and forth and wishy-washy. And I was like, okay, yeah. So I was like, Lord, I'm going to just put everything in your hands. I'm going to put everything on you. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know where you're leading me, what you have planned for me, but I know that you're going to show me little by little. You're going to reveal it to me, and I'm just going to be along for the ride. Whatever you want me to do, then just you let me know little by little, and literally from that moment on, I've been with my wife 8 years now. We've been married,
Awesome.
and this is like I would say like about 5 years ago forward. I just literally sat there and watched how my life started to transform radically, like in every sense. It just everything started to turn around with work, with my mentality, with my relationships, um, just everything started to change, and things were just, we were seeing things, praying about things, and then all of a sudden just seeing uh answers, and things shifting and changing, and it was just unbelievable. I was just shocked. And I also came to understand for the first time in my life, like truly and deeply, what happened during all this time, and God's grace, what grace really means.
Yeah.
And all this time, the fact that whatever happened after that, but the fact was is that I had already turned my life over to him. I had gotten saved. I accepted Jesus in my life, in my heart, as my savior. And that gave me like the base. I was like, okay, now you're in the door. Now all this other stuff that's going to happen, it's going to happen, right? But
Yep.
you're good now. I've got you, and you're going to go through this process. And I did, and he led me through a lot of painful processes, but all of those processes served later on to teach me lessons and to show me how God's mercy works,
Yeah.
and his patience, and
Yeah.
trusting in him. And when he has a purpose, his time is always right. It's always the best.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was, Adam. It was it's been a wild ride. It's been a roller coaster ride my whole life.
Yeah.
But all of
Yeah.
these experiences, now, and I'm not gonna pretend. I don't want anybody out there to think that I'm trying to put this image out there that I'm so the holy Christian now or anything like that. Anybody that watches my channel know that's not the case, because I get a little worked up sometimes, and I still struggle with my language at sometimes, but it
Yeah.
comes from a good place. It's a passionate reason, and
Yeah.
I want to help people to they don't have to be living in a lie and be
Absolutely.
suffering unnecessarily because of the whims of these organizations and these men that are not doing what God's will is. They are not directed by his spirit. They're not speaking for God.
They're speaking for themselves.
That's right. Yep, totally. And I think also if anybody watches the videos that you've done, or the interview that we did a while back, then that should be abundantly clear. You
Yeah.
look at somebody else, totally different person in another country that was in a totally different cults, and yet you see all these similarities. They use the same tactics and everything, and so that should make a light bulb turn on for active witnesses, and that's what I hope. We all hope. We just had, sadly, a member of the ex-witness community who had just recently come out, took his own life. Very recently here, and it was very tragic. And he uploaded a video, basically like his goodbye
Goodbye.
video, and it just shook everybody. I mean, just and unfortunately, some people react that way. Not everybody. Some of us go through like what I went through. You go through this self-destructive phase, and by God's grace, you come out of it, and
And
other
some
people
don't.
don't. Yeah, some don't. Unfortunately, some don't make it. When they come to that, they hit that wall, and they realize, like, everybody's turned their back on me. I'm getting shunned now. Everything's a lie. My whole life has been a lie. They can't deal with it. It's too much. So we're literally fighting for people's souls here. This is a spiritual battle.
Yeah.
You know,
And the tightwads in New York, the governing body, it's no skin off their nose. They're not going to lose sleep over it. They're not going to lose sleep over. And the Jehovah's Witness watching, you say like, "Oh, it will never be you. It's never going to be me. I would never But the thing is that's what Collin said. I would never leave Jehovah. I'm never going to be on the outside. I said that about my cults too. I'm never going to leave this. I'm never going to be this until you
Yeah.
are. And then you realize how quickly that community, that Jehovah's love, or in my case, Mother's love from my Korean doomsday cult, you'd be surprised how quickly that love, that community, that sense of purpose and hope and life vanishes in an instant.
Yes. Yes.
And the apostates, right? The people who are on the outside that you consider the Satan system, they're going to be the ones that pick up the pieces. They're going to be the ones that are there to help you, there to guide you, there to give you a shoulder to cry on, give you a shoulder. You're not going to get that from these true organizations. You're not going to get that from your brothers and sisters in the Kingdom Hall or Zion, which is the same thing I came from, or whatever cult you're coming from. And you know who's not going to lose sleep over it? The higher ups. But your life is going to be torn apart, and guess what? They're not going to be there to help you.
That's
We're
right.
going to be there to help you. That's it. That's all you got.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. Yeah, those people are not going to be there. And how many of us, I know that in your case as well, and in mine and many others, that we all have people that we knew, we grew up with, our family members, my own. And that's why, I get people that ask me about, because these people will come on the channels, they'll leave comments and that are witnesses, and they'll say, oh, why, you've said enough. Why don't you just move on? Just, go on with your life. Why keep talking about it? And it's like, no, as long as I'm still actively affected by this, I'm still suffering because of this, because I have my two brothers and their families and their children who are my nieces and nephews I've had no relationship with my entire life, that continue to shut me out of their lives. And so as long as that continues to happen, I'm going to continue talking about this because I'm actively being hurt by it. I can't just turn a blind eye to it and, okay, well, I said my part and move on. Oh, they would love that, wouldn't you? If I stop doing it. So,
and I would actually say this to those who are saying those comments. I would say this. Imagine someone you loved got abused by somebody, right? Like horrifically abused by somebody. Would you then tell that person, the one you love, hey, just move on? Why do you keep talking about it? Why do you keep bringing it up? Move on. What's wrong with you? Like you said your piece. Move on. Would you ever say that to somebody who got abused in such a manner, horrifically by somebody? Or would you, with every living breath that you have going forward, try and warn people about this person who's abusing people, so that way no one has to go through what your loved one went through?
yeah.
But in the Jehovah's Witnesses case, for some reason, if it has to do with religion, it's okay, right? Just move on. Just, so what, you've been lied to for 30 plus years? So what, you've been, bamboozled and this and that and the other? We've been spiritually abused, and some have even been physically or, horrifically abused in some cases, even sexually. And your response to that is, shut up, move along, you've said your piece. Like, shame on you, and
Yes.
grow up.
Yes. Right.
Grow up.
Yeah. And that's
Anyway.
the same that I would say to anybody out there, whether the people viewing us during this program, whether they're from the Jehovah's Witness cult or Whimscog or Mormons or Moonies or whatever the case might be, wherever you're coming from, do your own independent research outside of your organization. If you're witnesses, look at the Australian Royal Commission that was handled in Australia about the CAS, okay, the child abuse, and look at that. There were governing body members under oath. Listen to what they said. Listen to the explanations they gave. Was it truthful? Go watch it for yourself. Look at your doctrines. What happened in 1914? What happened to the generation? That was the central doctrine of the witness organization for like 120 years. What happened to it? The end was supposed to come before they disappeared. They're all gone.
Yeah.
What happened? It was even on a magazine cover. They were not gonna, the generation that would never disappear, never die off. They died off. What happened to that? What happened to, the famous, do research on the date of 607 BCE, excuse me. Do research on that. Do research on Rutherford and Russell, what they were really about. Do research on the beginnings, like you said, of the Great Awakening in the mid 1800s, where this guy Williams came from, and the founder of the Adventist Church and the Mormons, and they all came from the same beginnings.
Yeah,
all of them. So you have to do independent research outside of their influence, of their literature. And also, the video that I just did, do your research on how the organization handled COVID-19 and the vaccinations. But it's not going to be particularly the organization. You have to look at the objections that were brought up by the Catholic Church and how they handled it. Because the issue isn't, as I said before, it's not about whether the vaccination was right or wrong or good or bad or none of that. It's just, did the organization allow you to make the best informed decision that you could about getting or not getting the vaccine?
Right.
Did they give you all the information? Did they give you all the info about research, about what went into the manufacture of it, so that you could make a conscientious decision? Or did they really coerce you into getting it?
Yeah.
Because they state that they don't get involved in those issues. Oh, we don't tell anybody what to do with medical. Oh, really? You need to research what happened there, because they knew that information, but they did not share it with you. Now, like I said, I'm not saying you maybe would have still gotten it or maybe not, but at least you would have made that decision with more knowledge. Yeah. Because I can guarantee you that 99.999% of witnesses who got vaccinated did it simply because the governing body said, hey, it's okay, we all did it. So allegedly. Go ahead and, go, allegedly, supposedly. And of course, that's another thing. They have to understand that all of the, at least on the level of all of the Bethel branches all over the world, so we're talking about thousands and thousands of employees, basically, that work full-time at these headquarters all over the world. They got, I don't know in other countries what the exact quantity is, but in the United States, they got around $5,000 per employee during the pandemic to help them during that time. And so you start adding up the numbers. It's a lot of money. Okay, so they had a really good motivation to get people vaccinated in the organization. So you gotta start, people, witnesses. You gotta research. Do your research, so that at the very least you can understand how you were lied to by this organization, not just in medical issues. And if you find that out, then that's going to lead you into the blood issue. What have they been lying to you about there?
Yeah.
And that's caused people to lose their lives.
Yeah, it has.
So it's a serious issue. And if you are a person that is inclined spiritually, if you consider yourself to be a Christian, if you're concerned about salvation, then you need to do this, because it is at stake. Your salvation is at stake.
Absolutely. Well, Collin, I think we basically covered everything in this, and I appreciate your time. His channel is called The CO Visit. We're going to collab on this, so feel free to check out his stuff. Very insightful, very good. Been binge watching it. Very helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, for your testimony, and doing what you do. It's not easy doing what we do, and I appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate it, and anytime.
And for those of you still watching, thank you for continuing watching and letting us rant. And it's really important information. So if you can like, share, and subscribe both to his channel and my channel, and get this video out there, I appreciate it. And I have a playlist on the screen, and there's going to be a recommended video on the screen, so feel free to check those out. And until next time, as always, God bless you and keep you.
Okay. God bless.